Thursday edition, Orange and Blue today. Cecil Lammy, Andrew Mason talking wide receivers, and we know Courtland Sutton. We know what to expect from Courtland Sutton, but what do we expect from everybody else?
Well, do we know what to expect from Courtland Sutton?
I would say near 1,000 yards receiving and 8 to 10 touchdowns.
Okay,
that's a nice
fair.
number for Court.
It's a nice number. I mean, but do we expect 1,000 yards again? Because he hit that mark last year. Does he hit it again this year? That also may well determine whether you're bringing him back or not. Of course, the contract situation, that's what's floating above everything for Courtland Sutton this year, right? Because he's going into his contract year. Do you bring him back or not? Because 2026, of course, is year 9. You have to make a decision on him in this coming year, whether to bring him back or not, and at what value. That's another thing, too. So I think we know you're going to get reliable production, but is it going to be worth the kind of numbers that he may be demanding here? That's a fair question to ask as well. Broncos didn't go receiver first round or second round, but they did go receiver in round 3 with Pat Bryant. We'll get to him here as we go on in the show, but certainly if they drafted receiver round 1, it would have been an interesting discussion. Drafting receiver round 3 with Pat Bryant maybe buys Courtland Sutton a little more grace when it comes to contract discussion, but at the same time, is he really worth the kind of money he may demand, especially when you're talking about that contract being for year 9, year 10, year 11? That's a fair discussion to have.
Yeah, and Mike Clay has... Everyone take it easy on Mike. I'll say that because we've got some responses and even our YouTube comments, and sometimes they're not kind, which is fine. But Mike Clay does exceptional work. He's done the projections for the receivers that we're going to talk about and comp it, of course, because it's going to add up to the Bo Nix show that we've already done here this week on OBT.
Well, it's also, I look at these numbers as a launching point for a discussion, launching pad, right? Okay. Not the be all end all, but let's just start here and then go from there. Kind of, okay, what does this imply? If this player has this type of season, what happened and what does it mean going forward? So I'd say let's just start with Courtland Sutton. Let's start with the projection for Courtland Sutton and then discuss what it means. So here we go. Mike Clay's projection for Courtland Sutton. So he doesn't project Courtland Sutton to have 1,000 yards. He projects him at 898. Does project him to have a pretty decent touchdown number. Now, we've talked about this on earlier shows. Clay tends to have somewhat conservative statistical totals, although I did make a note of the context of 898 yards. That would rank 35th among wide receivers based on all the receivers that he has stacked up. So let's say Courtland Sutton's receiving yardage total is 35th, but his touchdown tally, as it is here, is tied for 5th.
Yeah.
Among wide receivers. Is that the sort of production where you're saying, let's give him an extension at the type of numbers that he may want? Because an extension means $20+ million a year for year 9, year 10, year 11 of Courtland Sutton's career. And this is a fair discussion to have, and one where you can make the argument either way.
Yeah, and it's a guy that's already played ball with you. So is this the time to be like, okay, Court, do it again? He played ball with you last year. Can I have a raise? No. Here's some incentives. And he got all of his incentives. And he got larger numbers than what you're seeing on the screen from Mike Clay. So when is the extension done? Is it done before the start of the regular season? And if it is, and it's 20 to 25 million a year, you're going to expect more than 898 yards. It's just the bottom line. You'd say 1,100, 1,200 is more of the appropriate level of production. And the touchdowns are always going to be the touchdowns. 8 to 10, 7, 8, 9, 10. That's about where it's going to be. And touchdown production usually has a bit of a roller coaster. And with Sutton, it's been somewhat steady over the last couple of years.
Right. His cap number for this year, by the way, 20.2 million, but that's because you had a higher number this year. It doesn't certainly reflect the APY, average per year, of his contract right now, because you had a lower figure in earlier years than you have this year. So he's got a higher cap figure for this year. But, just looking at the average per year numbers, I mean, $20 million a year, Cease, doesn't even get him into the top 20 of wide receivers in 2025, if that's what his future contract is. I mean, realistically, you're probably looking at Courtland Sutton, if you can get a deal done for him. Well, Devontae Adams, the deal he got from the Rams, his APY, $22 million a year. Chris Godwin's APY, coming off of the injury that he had last year with Tampa Bay, $22 million a year. Stephon Diggs, his APY with New England, $21.67 million a year. Mike Evans, going back to Tampa Bay, $20.5 million a year. Of course, he's a bit older than Courtland Sutton as well. So,
and has never not had a 1,000-yard season.
Yes. So Sutton, younger than Evans, also not as productive as Mike Evans as well. So probably the baseline APY is 20. And if Sutton may demand 21, 22 billion APY.
Sure. Yeah.
Would you give that to him?
Yeah, I would.
Okay.
I enter this thing going like 25's a max I don't like getting to.
Ooh.
22 is right on the money, in my opinion. And again, he played ball with you. And it's not about feelings. And I know the NFL does not work that way. But the way they do business, it's like, hey, prove yourself. Oh, you proved yourself. Like it or not, it's time for the Broncos to pay.
He played ball and he earned the incentives.
Yep.
They said, okay, you want more money, go out and earn it. To his credit, he went out and earned it. Everything worked out well. I mean, we often talk about how last year at minicamp, he showed up after he'd stayed away from voluntary OTAs last year. He showed up for minicamp, had one type of demeanor when he answered questions on day 2 of minicamp, certainly didn't appear to be in a very good place as he talked about his future, but then met with Sean Payton, talked about things, and then a day later, coming out of minicamp, after that conversation, when he discussed things at his charity event at Coors Field, much more conciliatory, much more excited and engaged and talking about the future. And that really was the precursor to not only a good season on the field, but also a season where he really consolidated his position as a team leader. And this is another thing. I want to just say this as we go back to the Courtland Sutton numbers, just to put them up on the screen. This type of production, hey, if he's tied for 5th in the league in touchdown receptions among wide receivers, you're happy with that. Would I like to see more than 898 yards? Yeah. I want to see him at 1,000 yards again. And frankly, I look at that yardage total and I'd be a bit disappointed. I want to see him back with his 3rd 1,000-yard season of his career. That's, I think, a fair expectation. But numbers don't define Courtland Sutton, because it's also locker room presence and leadership. To me, that's part of what you're paying for. And that's why, even though you kind of have to swallow hard a little bit at a $22 million a year type number, you say, okay. And this is also something that you can do because you have one of my favorite phrases in all of the world, a cost-controlled quarterback.
Yes. Yeah, it's awesome. Take advantage of it. And Courtland Sutton, go out there and get your bag and produce in the way that we expect. But it's about Sutton and the kids. And it's Sutton's veteran leadership makes him stand out amongst these young receivers, exciting young receivers, but young receivers with question marks, because we don't yet know right now who's the number 2, who's the number 3, etc.
Okay. So let's start with the guy who at least down the stretch last year, looked like the number 2 in terms of production. And that, of course, is Marvin Mims Jr. Maybe not the ideal number 2 in terms of skill set, but in terms of making plays, was definitely wide receiver 2, even though definitely a bit of a hybrid, not a traditional wide receiver 2. And the production, as Mike Clay projects, certainly does translate to wide receiver 2 as we get into it here. Let's, a little trouble putting that on the screen there. So, ranks second in receiving yardage, second in receptions among wide receivers. You also have to put the rushing in there as well. So that's why we get to 796 scrimmage yards, as Mike Clay projects it, for Marvin Mims Jr. in 2025. But I'll say this, Cease, as I look at that level of production, 668 yards over the course of an entire season, that's perfectly cromulent, but I think based on the pace that he had over those last 7 games of last year in the regular season, when he had a couple of 100-yard games, of course, against Cleveland and Cincinnati, punctuated by the touchdowns he had in those games. Over the last 7 games, Cease, if you took just those 7, Sutton on a 1,000-yard pace for the season based on his work in the final 7 weeks, or the final 7 games, of the 2024 campaign. If Marvin Mims Jr. comes up with 668 receiving yards in 2025, I think that number would be a little bit disappointing. I'd be surprised if he ends up with only 668 receiving yards based on how we saw him used down the stretch.
And I think that the yards per catch is a little light.
Yeah.
If it is 669, it might be on 30 catches instead of 47.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And by the way, if it's 30 catches in the year, that's a couple catches a game. Like I think that is light. I'm not saying he's a 1,000-yard receiver, and his rushes will be his rushes. That might actually go down. But I think you could bump up the yards per catch and, bump up the catches, perhaps, let's say 55, 60. Seems more like a step forward. I don't think Marvin Mims is done, and I'm not saying that Mike Clay thinks he's done or he's leveled off, but these numbers just kind of indicate, okay, this is where he's at. I think there's another level, there's another gear with Marvin Mims, a gear of production. There's another step, and maybe it's not a large step, and he'll never be a 1,100-yard receiver, but there's a step coming where, because of his yards per catch, he could be an 800-900-yard receiver pretty easily.
I actually think he settles at 1,000 yards from scrimmage. Maybe not 1,000 receiving yards. I mentioned that pace, but I think Marvin Mims Jr. ends up with 1,000 yards from scrimmage.
Oh yeah. Yep. I could see that. Yep.
And that's a magic number for him. And I think how he gets there, I'm not quite sure. Is it 250 rushing yards, 750 receiving? Is it 350 rushing, 650 receiving? 200 rushing, 800 receiving? I don't know, and I'm not really sure Sean Payton cares. And I think also with Marvin Mims Jr., the overall picture with him includes what he does on special teams as well.
Sure.
Because I don't think he's being pulled off punt returns anytime soon. And that's another factor that you look into as well, because when they talk about his productivity and getting him opportunities, punt and kickoff returns always matters. And now that you've changed the kickoff return rules again, because you're trying to create more opportunities, Darren Rizzi, Broncos' new special teams coordinator, was involved with the discussions at the league meetings about getting those kickoff return rules tweaked to create more opportunities. So he's sitting there in those rules meetings, and one of the things going through his mind is not only creating more opportunities for returns, but somewhere in his mind is, okay, getting my new guy, Marvin Mims Jr., an all-pro already 2 years in, more chances. And so this is part of the equation as well with Marvin Mims. That's not scrimmage yards, but it's all-purpose yards. But in general, more explosive opportunities for him. So it's getting these opportunities, returns, rushes, receptions. I don't think Sean Payton really cares how they happen. He just wants to create opportunities for Mims to have explosives, to make these game-breaking, game-changing moments. And if at the end of the season, let's say Mims ends up with, I think maybe to just put the numbers back up there real quick, 5 touchdowns. You see, Clay has him with 1 rushing touchdown and 4 receiving touchdowns. Let's say the kickoff return rules give him some more opportunities, and maybe there's that breakthrough and he gets a return touchdown or 2. Maybe what we're talking about for Marvin Mims Jr. here as the number that jumps out isn't yardage, but touchdowns. 8 touchdowns, perhaps, being a number that you establish as a goal, but you don't care how they come. Returns, rushes, receptions. If he gets to 8 touchdowns, that's a number you're really happy with, no matter what phase they come through.
He's made plays for you. And if everyone wants to go to the Saints comparison, if he is in fact your Brandon Cooks, then it's not 668. It's pushing for, let's just say 800 and 200 yards rushing. There's your 1,000 yards from scrimmage.
Yes.
But I don't know the rest of the numbers. So these Mims numbers seem a little light, but is that because somebody else is making plays, or is it because Clay thinks Mims has leveled off? Again, we don't think Mims has leveled off, but we got to see the rest of the numbers for these guys.
Well, the other thing also, just to bring returns into play, because Clay doesn't dive into returns, but I think that's also part of the equation here for Marvin Mims Jr. In his rookie season, Marvin Mims Jr., 312 yards on punt returns, 397 yards on kickoff returns. So quick math, that's 709 return yards in total. Last year, 408 yards on punt returns, only 194 yards on kickoff returns. And so that's adding up to what? That's about 408.50. That's what? That's just under that's about 602, I believe. So just a little bit a bit off last year. Obviously, fewer kickoff return opportunities, because his kickoff return opportunities went from 15 as a rookie to 7 last year. And that's what you're hoping bumps up. And again, that's where Darren Rizzi being extremely involved with the kickoff return change discussions. That's where you're hoping it gives Mims a little bit of an advantage as well, and maybe gives him some opportunities for some breakaway plays there. That's going to be part of the equation here for Marvin Mims Jr. And so I think that's something to consider as well when you're talking about, okay, at the end of the day, what's his yardage, what's his production, and where are the touchdowns coming from as well for him? Because if he gets production there, pretty happy.
Now, what else for everyone else? Because our Mims numbers light, or is somebody else doing more?
Well, last year, of course, as we go through the Broncos, Marvin Mims Jr. was number 2 in receiving yards. DeVaughn Vele was number 3. Okay. All right. Do we want to go with who Mike Clay has as number 3, or we want to start with Vele, who was number 3 last year?
Let's go with who Mike Clay has as number 3.
Okay.
Nice.
Pat Bryant. Okay. So let's have this discussion.
I like this a lot, Mace. I like this a lot.
What happened in the 2025 season if Pat Bryant is wide receiver 3 for the Broncos?
And honestly, not to get technical, but he could be like wide receiver 2, and then Mims could be the speed slot. But either way, like for me, it's his clutch gene, and it's the fact that he can cut a rug. He can run routes, and we have not yet put eyes on DeVaughn Vele this year, but you and I both talked to him last year about leverage and what he was learning from Courtland Sutton, and I asked it, Mace, in a nice way, because he did not understand leverage in a similar way to Courtland Sutton. Now, he's not going to. He's a rookie, 7th round or whatever, but Bryant's, pro-ready, a term I don't really like, but he's pro-ready because he knows how to run routes. He's not fast. Yeah, okay. You're not going to see a ton of separation, but you're going to see my ball mentality, the ability to use his frame to box out smaller defenders. And yeah, he's that little Jordan Humphrey, but a bonus as a better receiver than LJH was, in my opinion.
That's sort of a key thing right there, because with Lil Jordan, there was a distinct ceiling for him.
And how many snaps did he play? 51%, right? Wasn't that the number? 50%?
Well, he played more snaps, right, than any receiver not named
Courtland Sutton.
Yeah.
So if he's your plus player,
yes.
If he's your plus player, a plus LJH, and LJH with better receiving ability, then this makes sense. Now we could debate the numbers and are they a little light or whatever, but it was like, yeah, I could see Pat Bryant having 50 catches this year. And let's put the number at, 500-600 yards instead with 3 touchdowns, 5 touchdowns, whatever the number. But like, I really like that. I like that a lot because Bryant's readier for the NFL game than Vele showed last year, unless he takes a step, which he could, and that Franklin showed last year. And maybe that wild card game was an indication of where Franklin's going to go. But I really like that this is Pat Bryant as the number 3 receiver.
Okay. So to just go back to last year for a moment.
Okay.
Lil Jordan Humphrey ranked 2nd among Broncos wide receivers in snaps, but in receiving yardage among Broncos wide receivers, he was 3rd, or he was 4th, pardon me, because it was Courtland Sutton, Marvin Mims Jr., DeVaughn Vele, and then Humphrey, and he was all the way down there at 293 yards. So, like, what does that say? That he was 2nd in snaps, and then he was 4th in receptions, and he was 4th in receiving yardage.
Right.
He was out there to block, and he did that very well.
Mm-hmm.
But I think it also sort of revealed the limitations on him. You knew what you were getting, but the ceiling was distinct and palpable. So what you're hoping is that Pat Bryant can deliver some of the reliability and that DeVaughn Vele can deliver some of the blocking ability. We know that from talking with Devon Vele that he studied Lil Jordan in terms of his blocking capability and tried to gather something from that. Hey, good guy to learn from, right?
Yeah, for sure. Yeah.
I mean, Lil Jordan did all the little things, did them well. Unfortunately, wasn't as good of a pass catcher as you'd like, which again, like I said, puts a ceiling on what he's going to be able to do to help you. But that's okay. But sort of to go back to one of the things that I've said this week, and I think it's just going to be kind of a theme, is that maybe this Broncos team, as the roster improves, grows past some of these players that were valuable in 23 and 24, but as the roster improves, like a kid grows up and grows out of smaller clothes, grows out of toys that they play with at a younger age. You grow out of guys that helped you on earlier, right? So
yeah. Mm-hmm.
And so maybe Lil Jordan,
that's what you're hoping happens, players, by the way.
Yeah.
It's what you hope happens with We'll do tight ends later, but like that's what you hope happens with Adam Troutman. I hope they find an upgrade from Adam Troutman. I hope they find an upgrade from Little Jordan Humphrey. I think that's Pat Bryant.
Perhaps. I mean, we'll see. With Adam Troutman, that may be like a year away.
Sure. Yeah.
I mean, with Adam Troutman, that may involve either the development of Caleb Lawner or, as we talked about when we did the mock draft, when we did the way too early mock draft show last week, that may involve a tight end next year.
Right.
This year was the deep year for tight ends, but would it surprise me at all if they go for tight end 1 next year? No. And in fact, I could, if I were sitting here today saying, okay, what position is going to be the one where the Broncos target with their first round pick next year? If I had to try to predict down to 3 positions, tight end will be one of them.
Mm-hmm.
So wide receiver would probably be one of them too. But again, too early to project because we want to see how these guys develop. They've got a lot of arrows in the quiver, a lot of young arrows like Mims, like Pat Bryant, like DeVaughn Vele. Let's take a look at DeVaughn Vele and what Mike Clay's projection is for him. And this is where it gets interesting because
wow.
Yeah, Clay
not a lot.
Is calling for a little bit of a regression. Basically, Clay is projecting that Pat Bryant is going to usurp DeVaughn Vele.
Okay.
And this is something I am not quite sure about. And this would actually surprise me a little bit. Now, that being said, perhaps this is falling into, okay, can Pat Bryant be a better version of DeVaun Vele? But this is also saying, oh, DeVaun Vele, you think he's not going to make progress? I think Vele can grow. I think Vele can improve.
How much of this is Pat Bryant, which very excited about and what he could do, and how much of this is, oh yeah, RJ Harvey's going to catch 75 passes? You know, there's only so many passes to go around, and if we look at these numbers for these Broncos receivers, you say, okay, 80 for Sutton, 50 for Mims, maybe 50 for Bryant. You know, we're running out of room if RJ Harvey gets 75 catches.
But he doesn't have RJ Harvey catching 75 passes. That's the thing.
Then this is very interesting because that's a catch a game for DeVaun Vele.
Yeah, I can't see that happening.
35 catch. Put it at 35. That's 2 catches a game. And if Bryant makes that step, then that's about where Vele would be, just given that, you know, guys are going to eat, and that means guys aren't going to eat. And there's players you design plays for, Sutton and Mims, and there's players that got to eat with everything else. I think Pat Bryant's your best scavenger, if you will, after those top 2.
If Vele loses playing time, is it from Bryant or is it from Troy Franklin? See, that's another thing.
It should be from Franklin.
Because Franklin has more speed. Like if you're talking about someone taking playing time from Vele, it's more likely to be Franklin because you say, okay, he can go vertical better because they're both long. They both have wingspans, but Franklin can get from A to B faster. And certainly Vele was more ready to go immediately, as we saw. He was inactive because he had that early season injury after week 1. Of course, he had 8 catches, but only 39 yards in that first game at Seattle. But then when he got back out there against the Chargers, immediately was productive. And then he had some nice productivity November into early December. But then we saw the breakthrough happen after the Broncos were trying over and over and over with Troy Franklin. So it's interesting that for Mike Clay, he's got Pat Bryant kind of taking it from DeVaun Vele. He doesn't really have Troy Franklin taking it from DeVaun Vele. The projection that Mike Clay has for Troy Franklin is a rookie season, or pardon me, the projection he has for Troy Franklin in year 2 is not a lot different from his rookie season. Troy Franklin as a rookie, 28 catches, 263 yards, 2 touchdowns. Second year numbers, 19 catches, 261 yards, 2 touchdowns. So fewer catches, almost the same amount of yards, and the same number of touchdowns. So this type of year, Cease, for Franklin, if it looks like Mike Clay is projecting, is basically a push. It's not progress for Troy Franklin. It's maintaining. He's not going forward. And if you're not going forward, even if you're staying the same, if you're not going forward, you're going backward. I mean, basically, statistically, Mike Clay has DeVaughn Vele going backward. He has Troy Franklin staying the same, which basically means you're going backward.
Yeah. Yeah, in this league, especially when if Marvin Mims, let's say, levels off in his production, we go, yeah, but he's an all-pro returner. So what? Okay, now we've found the ceiling. We don't yet know the ceiling for Mims. But if Franklin does that and he takes a step backward or stays the same, then it's like, well, he's not a plus player on teams. So what is he? And now you give him 3 years. I'm giving Troy Franklin 3 years. It might take 3 years for him to hit. But those are some disappointing numbers for sure. It makes me wonder, we'll get to it probably Monday or Tuesday about the tight ends. What do those projections look like? Don't tell me. Don't spoil it for me. But this one with Franklin, because here's the thing. I'll ask you this question very succinctly, Mace. Would you design a play or two for Troy Franklin a game?
Yes.
Yes. And you don't say that about Vele. You don't say that about Pat Bryant. You do say it about Mims. You do say it about Sutton. But Franklin's one of those guys with his speed. You're going to dial it up. That wild card play. Biggest play of the game. You dial it up for Troy Franklin. Go take that shot.
It's why, like I said, if Vele loses snaps and loses production, I think it's to Franklin. But it's also a reminder, this is a zero-sum game here. So if somebody picks up opportunities, it's coming at someone else's expense.
Yep.
I make this allusion often because I think it's accurate. It is very much like a baseball team that's got a bunch of stud pitchers hitting high A, double A. But the way it is with pitching development, if you've got 5 stud pitchers that are hitting double A, you have to accept that probably a successful crop means that 60% of those guys aren't really going to help you at the major league level. If you've got 5 and you get 2 guys that are really helpful in the major leagues, you're ecstatic with that. So we're talking about these young receivers, and we now throw Pat Bryant into the mix. So we've got Marvin Mims Jr. to talk about, Troy Franklin, DeVaughn Vele, now Pat Bryant. And even though there's not a stat projection for A.T. Perry, I think you put him in there as well. So you've got this cluster of 5 receivers from the last 3 draft classes. If you find 2 guys who are helpful at a pro level, and I say helpful, that means if you've got a starting group of 3, 2 of them are solid to very good starters in a trio of 3, then I think you're pretty happy with that. We're pretty close to knowing that Marvin Mims Jr. is a solid to pretty good starting wide receiver in this league. We know he's an exquisite, excellent returner. He's an all-pro. He's elite in that skill. I think we're very close to finding out Marvin Mims Jr. is a pretty good, above average wide receiver as well. Don't think we have all the data yet, but we're close. I think by the end of 2025, we're going to be able to have a really good idea of whether the answer is yes or no. And the indications are, now that the Broncos and Sean Payton have figured out how to get the most out of him, I think the answer is going to be yes. So that's probably 50% of being there? And then can you find one from the rest of that? And if you find two from the rest of that group and you get three out of this young group of five, then you're ecstatic. Then you're like, wow, nice job. Way to go. But 2 out of 5, you're feeling pretty good. And so I think that's, and the thing is, Sean Payton doesn't really care who they are. Doesn't care if it's the guy that you drafted in the 3rd round or the guy who came aboard through the practice squad after being discarded by the Saints when they wanted to slip him through the practice squad. He does not care how the player came aboard. He just cares about finding the right guy. And we're fixing to find out here in the next few months which ones are going to be the right guys.
We're fixing to find out how much we can grow our YouTube channel, Mace. Some segues are better than others. But with that, we need your help as always. How can folks help us out?
Like,
comment,
share,
subscribe,
hit that notification bell
so that you
never miss vid.
That's right. He's Andrew Mason. You follow him on all the socials at Mace Denver. I'm at C Salami saying OBT's BFD. Thanks for watching. Stay tuned. And would you please stay frosty?